Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, I wanted to put together a list of builds that I've seen around the web that look like they're pretty good choices for 3.21 League starters. So a little bit on classification of builds here. I'm going to give a green flag to builds that I consider to be suitable for less experienced players. This doesn't mean they're bad if you're a veteran player. This just means that there is an excellent guide that will detail everything you need to know if you're wanting to play this build, start to finish. So there'll also be information on where to find that guide. I'm going to give a yellow flag to builds that I think are safe choices for somewhat experienced players that might require a bit of respecking along the way, or that might require a little bit of messing around to get gear to get through the early acts. I'm going to give an orange flag to builds that I feel are somewhat risky. Now, I'm going to be league starting one of these myself, I believe, but these may require items that are hard to source, or the build might be a little bit experimental. For example, I'm seriously considering league starting a build that uses the new Lightpoacher helmet that's being upgraded in patch 3.21, and that is also going to use the unique amulet Gloomfang. You can still make it work before that, but you're going to have to use different skills on the way. That's the sort of thing that's going to get an orange flag. And I'm going to give red flags to two builds that used to be really good, but that I think are genuinely quite bad choices now. That's two builds that have been nerfed substantially in this patch. So firstly, we're going to start with the cold damage over time archetype. This is playable on multiple ascendancies, and it has fantastic guides for it. I'm a real fan of Shack Central's Elementalist guide, and I'll put a link to that down in the description below, or you can search for Shack Central's Vortex for Everyone. There's also Jung Rowan's take on the build, which is a trickster, and there's several other guides that are doing the rounds. Basically, this is a green flag. Its damage is great early, it's serviceable late, and this is a build that can do everything, including in hardcore. Second, I'm going to give a yellow flag to Boneshatter. Now, this build tends to be played as a Juggernaut or a Slayer, with Juggernaut being slightly easier to start. Now, there are fantastic guides that are available from Khan and Tripolar Bear for the Slayer route, or from Garatha if you want to go with the Juggernaut route. Now, I'm going to give this one a yellow flag because there's self-damage to juggle here, as well as getting weapon upgrades throughout the campaign and through early mapping, which are non-trivial steps for new players, but for veteran players, they're very manageable steps to get over. Next, you have the explosive arrow Ballista. Now, very important note with this, the leaked information for 3.21 included something that was going to impact this build, but it seems like that's being reverted. So if you have been following those leaks, that doesn't seem to matter. Even if it does end up going through, it's not going to be a big deal. Now, this is best as Elementalist or Champion. Very, very different builds to each other. Pelstron has the default Elementalist guide, Zizaran for the Champion guide. Champion's what I would go if you're looking to play hardcore or be a bit tankier, and Pelstron's Elementalist if you want to do a bit more damage. Now, this build is a strong, proven performer, but there are 2 delays on damage application, and that will be annoying. That said, it still gets a green flag despite that. We're going to unfortunately have to give Bane a red flag. This has had an excellent build guide in the past from Subtractem, but unfortunately Bane has really been hammered by changes in 3.21. So this was hit hard by 3.21 nerfs to Withered. Subtractem thinks it can still be made to work, but it is not going to be a strong build. It's going to be something you can force to get through content, rather than something that's going to help carry you through it. Subtractem, however, does have an excellent new guide that I'll go through in a sec, because I do think it's something that I'm willing to give a green flag to, and that's good because Subtractem puts out some good build guides. And that is Subtractem's 2-skill Ignite. This one's getting a green flag. It's an unusual build because it actually uses 2 main skills. It tends to use a 6-linked Fire Trap and a 4-linked Frostblink. Frostblink does a lot of damage when it's set up to Ignite because it just has a high intrinsic damage, but for when that's not enough, you've got Fire Trap for the really heavy damage when you need it. Now, there is an extremely detailed guide for this that Subtractem has put out, and whilst Fire Trap is usually used for the damage over time ground that it leaves behind, this build uses it differently. This build uses it to inflict an Ignite when the trap actually goes off. As unusual as this build's skill combination might look, it gets the job done, and it gets it done well, and that's why it's something I'm willing to recommend with a green flag. Okay, so now we have something with an orange flag that is something I am considering playing, and this is Lightpoacher Ignite. So Lightpoacher is getting a new identity in 3.21. It's one of the Abyss uniques, and it's going to be gaining a big amount of elemental damage based on the amount of physical damage that you do. So this provides tremendous scaling to physical skills, and it seems to be best in conjunction with making those physical skills ignite. Now, not all physical spell skills are created equal. 2 of them are probably better than the rest of them when it comes to using ignites. These are Ethereal Knives and Wave of Conviction. Now, if you want to go with Ethereal Knives, you pretty much need to get the unique amulet Gloomfang, and that is absolutely staggeringly good on this setup. Lightpoacher plus Ethereal Knives plus Gloomfang, and particularly once you can also get the unique chest Incandescent Heart, this is going to be a phenomenal combination. This is what I want to play this league. However, you can also do the same setup with Wave of Conviction, which does not require the unique amulet Gloomfang, and is definitely going to be easier to get off the ground. Now you can level as Wave of Conviction Ignite all the way from Act 4 through to about level 90, and potentially even beyond. And there are also some really good options to make this build tankier in the Armor and Evasion Hybrid Masteries. These are really, really good. People are sleeping on them in general, and they will provide a very large amount of defense to people that are in the right area of the tree for them, which is exactly where you would be on a build like this. Next is one of my personal favorite builds and the other contender for my personal league starter. I'm giving this one a yellow flag here rather than a green flag because it's not really clear how well it will scale up to top-end bosses. It's certainly capable of doing non-Uber versions of the Searing Exarch and the Eater of Worlds on absolute dumpster tier gear, but I don't know how it's going to proceed beyond that. Now this is a build that's very strong but has higher player skill requirements than a lot of other builds, and that's because you need to be frequently going into point blank range with enemies. So this is definitely a strong build, but it is not newbie oriented, that's why it's getting a yellow flag. Now, Nyrok first popularized this build, and Jung Rowan has put out an excellent build guide that's loosely based on Nyrok's work, but also takes it further. Jung Rowan's guide is great for an experienced veteran player audience, but probably not something I would suggest if you are brand new to Path of Exile. Righteous Fire and Fire Trap is next, and this is definitely getting a green flag. This can be played on many ascendancies, Juggernaut currently being the most popular meta choice. Inquisitor is also an excellent choice, but it seems to be a few percent behind Juggernaut in power, and most players will go with the one that's a little bit stronger. Elementalist Righteous Fire takes a bit more gear to get off the ground, and it's something I would recommend maybe considering rolling as a second character after you get your hands on the unique flask Oriath's End. Oriath's End is absolutely incredible on a Righteous Fire Elementalist. Other ascendancies are possible too, but they, like the Elementalist, are going to get orange flags, whereas the Juggernaut and the Inquisitor get green. So, Fire Trap is used to supplement single target damage, but Righteous Fire is your main clear skill. If you're feeling brave, you can also experiment with Vaal Firestorm as an Ignite skill, as something that would be supplementary here to Righteous Fire and might replace Fire Trap. This is something that's experimental though, and ultimately I'm going to leave it up to you whether you do that or not. Fire Trap is definitely safe. Now the best guide to this is from Pox. Pox has a phenomenal guide to this, and you can definitely find that link down in the description below. Venom Gyre is the next skill I'm going to recommend here, and this is getting a yellow flag because it tends to be best on the Deadeye Ascendancy, and the Deadeye Ascendancy tends to be squishy. This skill is very strong, especially since the Vaal version was added recently, and Deadeyes might struggle with being squishy, and we don't yet know how much of a drawback that is in the context of the 3.21 Crucible League mechanic. If this mechanic is extremely punishing of being squishy, then maybe this will end up being a poor choice. Otherwise though, I think it'll be a good choice, and I think it is still fairly safe overall. Now there is a guide to this by Kobe Black Mamba. Next is something else that caught my eye today, and this is the Vaal Reap Scion. So Reap has always been a good skill at endgame, but it hasn't usually been considered a good starter skill. And that's because previously it's just been a little bit underwhelming when you haven't been heavily geared. Now what's happened now is that Vaal Reap has been added to the game. Physics has put together a guide that looks quite good on this build, and I'll put a link to that down in the description below. Once more, this is definitely a proven performer once you get to endgame. I'm giving this an orange flag just because I think it might be a little bit tricky for some people to get it to the endgame, but once you're at the endgame, it's definitely going to be strong. I think I might be being a little bit harsh here, and it might end up that green or yellow ends up being where it belongs, but I'm going to underpromise and overdeliver rather than do things the other way around. Next we have Vaal Eye Shot and Lightning Arrow if you're looking to start with a bow build. So both of these are looking very good now. The Vaal versions solve genuine problems these skills had, and also the additional projectiles coming earlier in progression, whereas previously they were gated behind getting very expensive synthesis implicits. Now there's something that you can get much earlier in progression on the passive tree itself. This looks like it's going to make a big difference to these skills. You may not need to level with greater multiple projectiles anymore, and that means you're going to have massively more damage. I think that these both have the potential to be excellent. I'm just not willing to promise they're going to be excellent, and that's why I'm going to give them orange flags. Bow builds got huge buffs to their early game this league, and I think that's going to be a really significant player in 321. It's just that there's not anything I can confidently recommend as yet that I have personally seen. Okay, so let's give a red flag this time, and this is for the Seismic Trap Saboteur. So previously, this is a build that has needed a nerf for a very long time. Finally, I can go out and give it a red flag. The new Saboteur lost a lot of trap damage. This hurts both the hit and the poison versions of this build. But additionally, the poison versions of this got hit even harder because of all the wither changes that took place. This is probably still going to be playable in a pinch, but it's going from S tier down to meh tier, and I think we will see very, very few of them being played on the ladder this league. Finally, there's lots more options out there. I'm going to give a yellow flag to SRS Poison, SRS Hit, and Corrupting Fever. I'm going to give a green flag to a more traditional version of Wave of Conviction Ignite, one that doesn't use Lightpoacher. I'm going to give an orange flag to traditional Ethereal Knives Ignite that doesn't use Lightpoacher, but does still require Gloomfang to get rolling. Then I'm going to give a green flag to Explosive Trap Trickster or Inquisitor, and a yellow flag to Dominating Blow Guardian. If you're interested though, I will put a link down in the description below to a number of these builds. May your Vaal orbs have interesting results, and I will see you in the Crucible.